Well, kids need all the encouragement and love they can get.
And there's a place that has a reputation for doing just that. Check this out.
A Boys and Girls Club is a place for young people that's safe and positive for them to come after school. Statistics show that after 3 p.m. is the most vulnerable time for young people, and it's a time when they're alone. Boys and Girls Clubs offers a place that is safe and positive for young people to receive mentoring and coaching from a caring professional, and staff professionals within Boys and Girls Clubs provide not only a safe environment for young people, but an opportunity to mentor them and also to speak to them about what they want to do in their future. Really, the opportunity for a young person to grow up in a club is very important. So being a teenager in a club, we really have to find activities to make sure that they stay engaged. We just don't want to recruit them, but make sure that they graduate through the experience of the club. And so workforce development, we know, is not only a carrot, but it's an opportunity to retain young people within the Boys and Girls Club environment. We have a three-pronged approach to workforce development in Boys and Girls Clubs. The first is to allow young people to explore, and that really is assessing their own interest, the opportunity to ask questions to staff and to really see what they're interested in so they can explore different career pathways. The second is really skill development, and that's the opportunity for young people to hone in on their soft skills, communication, problem solving, and really hone in on those skills from as early as 6 years old all the way through graduation. And then young people also have the opportunity to work on any technical or hard skills for a specific job opportunity. And then lastly, application, which is really the opportunity for young people to practice those soft skills and those hard skills on a real on-the-job experience in clubs. We connect with local businesses and companies in order to do that. Our national program, Career Launch, is really the entry point for learning about yourself as a young person. And so as early as 13 years old, young people are able to take an assessment that asks them certain questions about what they're interested in, whether you like to use your hands, what could that lead to in terms of your career, and maybe even a college pathway for that career. And so Career Launch really provides not only information about how to interview and to develop your own resume, but it gives you an opportunity to really hone in on some of the interests that you may have and that you never knew a career could come from that. We know that giving young people exposure very early on for STEM-related careers is very important. There are statistics that also show that STEM-related career fields will be the most in-demand, fastest-growing fields in the future, and so we want to make sure we can prepare young people for that. Junior Staff Program is really an internship program within the club. So young people who are interested in human services, social services careers can shadow a club professional in the club through a 12-hour program that gives you an 80-hour experience through an internship. We also have programs like Money Matters where they're able to develop skills in financial literacy and education. Boys and Girls Clubs are really here to provide young people with that hope that they can make a difference in their communities, that they can become something that they want to become in the future, and that they can do and be whatever they want to be.
And thanks to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America for sharing that information. Learn more by visiting bgca.org.